God is so good. Man, what a joy it has been to be with you this morning, worshiping together. This is an exciting time. This is that time, whether y'all realize it or not, November is here, October is over. I told the early service that it was kind of a strange time of year because we're used to just being busy with so many things. I walked in the store the other day and I saw skeletons and Christmas trees on the same aisle. I didn't know what to think about that. It just kind of gets us a little confused in all of these things. Well, we are starting a new sermon series. For the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be looking at the 7 statements Jesus made of I am because of this very reason. For one, we need to understand the identity of Jesus Christ and who He is. Because when we call ourselves followers of Jesus, then we take that identity onto ourselves. So when we understand Jesus and who He is and how He explains Himself, that is explaining our character and our nature for those of us who are followers of Jesus. So that's why we, for the next couple of weeks, are going to be looking at these statements and the significance of these statements for us. And so today we're going to be looking at the first one in John chapter 8, verse 12. One verse, that's all I've got. Doesn't mean we're going to get out early, but I'm just telling you, it's just one verse. We're going to be talking about this idea of the light of the world. Now, when is light most needed? When do you most need a light? Obviously, we would say, well, when it's dark, when we're outside and we don't know our path, or when there's something unforeseen for us before us, we usually need some kind of light. And so, to answer the question of when is a light most needed, it is when we recognize the darkness. A light is most needed when we recognize the darkness. The problem is for us, church, is that sometimes you and I do not recognize the darkness that is around us. And so what we have to do is we have to remember all that God has done for us so that we may understand what God has given us in the light. This is why in the Old Testament, for many years, God was telling and commanding the Israelites to remember all that God had done so that they'll continue to walk not in the darkness but in the light. In the New Testament, we are told to remember all that Jesus has done for us. Do you really know all that God has done for you today? Because if we do, then we continue to live in this sense of walking in the light. And so I want us to understand and answer this question. What has God really provided for each and every one of us? What has God done for you? This past week, what has God done for you? Today, what has God done for you? In your life, what has God done for you? How has God provided for you? Because it's so important for us to remember the things that God has done for us. God commanded the Israelites to do this. In fact, Jesus is talking about in this text that we're going to look at a great remembrance of what God had done. In John chapter 8, verse 12, it says this: when Jesus spoke again to the people, He said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, what is so significant about Jesus making this statement to those that are gathered together in the temple to listen to what He has to say? Why is it so important when He says, I am the light of the world? Now let's talk about the context of what Jesus is speaking and when Jesus is saying this, because that's very important for us to understand the big picture of what God is trying to tell us through His Word. So in chapter 7 of John, we're given this idea of a feast, a festival that the Jews were required to partake in. It would be like if people didn't have a choice to celebrate Christmas, that they had to celebrate Christmas. That was something that you were called upon and commanded to do. And everybody's like, amen, I like Christmas. Well, what about Valentine's Day? Not everybody likes that. What if you were commanded to celebrate Valentine's Day and you had no choice? Some of you would grumble about that, but that's a whole nother sermon. In chapter 7 of John, He gives us this idea of the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Festival of Tabernacles. And what's so important about this? This was one of the 7 annual feasts that the Jews had to celebrate. They had these 7. They were required to celebrate 3. They had to attend 3 festivals, and this was one of them. Why? Because it was the Festival of Tabernacles. Now, why is it called Tabernacles? Because they were to remember that God was with them through the 40 years that the Israelites wandered in the desert before they were given the opportunity to go into the promised land that God had promised them. So, during this festival, what they would do for 1 week is they would actually build little huts, shacks, whatever you wanted to call it, outside of their home, where some of the Jewish families would spend the whole week in this one-room hut. I can imagine that it was more or less like a little shack, and it wasn't no love shack. It was just a shack where everybody was together. You ate your meals. This was what they did for the 7 days of the week. Now, an interesting thing about this festival also is that it was required so that the people would remember what God did for them. They would remember that God provided for them this dwelling place so that He would be with them. But also, what we're told in Leviticus chapters 22 and 23 is when God inaugurated this feast so that they would remember the wandering that they took place and that God was with them before He brought them into the promised land. It also is reminded to us in Nehemiah chapter 8 where the prophet Nehemiah says, let's remember what God has done for us because the people got away from this festival. They got so busy in everyday life and just kind of forgot. They had some rulers that weren't on their game and did other things, and so they weren't commanded and told and reminded to do these things. Folks weren't reminded of what God had done for them. Folks, that's why you and I today need to remember what God has done for us, and we need to celebrate that every day because the Israelites were commanded by God, you must participate in this festival of the tabernacles to remember what God did for us during the 40 years, but also to understand God's presence with the people. You see, an amazing thing about this festival too that is remarkable and makes this statement of Jesus so significant is that the first day of this festival, they would create and build these lampstands or these big candelabras or these big ideas. It's where eventually they would get the idea of the menorah that a lot of you see in a lot of Jewish families and homes and stores and all these kind of things. But what they would do is build these big like columns with a bowl of oil that would burn. And they would use the old garments of the priest to be able to burn to bring significance. Now, what's important about this is that the whole week, these columns, these torches were burning to let the people see how it illuminated the whole temple. So people on the streets could look at a distance and know that this was the Festival of Tabernacles because those columns that were on fire were lit to let the people know of not only God's presence and His provision, but also the fact that as they were wandering through the desert, how did they know God's presence was with them? The cloud by day and the fire by night. It was the light that gave them guidance. So this is the context that Jesus stands up and tells the people, I am the light of the world. Now, the amazing thing about it is just like in the Jewish faith, where they were told to remember what God had done for them, all that God had provided, all that God was promising them. The understanding is that they would not lose sight of who God is. Now, church, let me ask you this. In the busyness of all of our day, how many times do you and I get so busy that we forget about what Jesus has done for us? We get so consumed by all the things in this world, how somebody did this to me, or I didn't get this, or something is wrong with this, or here's another struggle I have to go through, that we come to the point where we lose sight of what Jesus has done for us. Let me ask you this. How many of you sometimes when a storm is coming, you'll set out candles just in case the electricity goes out? Or you'll make sure the flashlights have battery, because the thing I don't like is picking up a flashlight and the batteries are dead. What use is that? So we always, when storms are coming or when things are getting bad, we always prepare because we know there may be a chance that we need some additional light because the electricity will go out or something will happen and we just won't be able to see, or we'll feel uncomfortable in the darkness. How many times in our lives do we forget to remember all that God has done for us until we get to that point where we're going through a tough time, until we get to the point where we're going through a storm ourselves. You see, it's this idea of a forgotten light that God was trying to tell the Israelite people not to do. Don't forget what God has done for you. What Jesus, I believe, is telling us in this one statement is to remember who He is. Remember what He has done. Remember that He is the Son of God. But sometimes we forget. Why? John reminds us in John chapter 3, verse 19, it says, "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world. But men loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil." The prophet Isaiah even said in Isaiah 5:20, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." You see, the problem is, folks, sometimes we forget what God has done for us. We forget that Jesus is the Son of God. You see, another amazing thing is Jesus was making this statement in the temple. And we're going to look at this in a little bit about why He made that statement. But the significance is that Jesus was making this statement talking about the light when the very festival centered around the fact that God provided for them the light to guide while they were in the wilderness, in the desert, wandering around for 40 years, waiting for that opportunity to go into the promised land that God had promised them. But sometimes you and I get so busy that we begin to not so much see the light. And you see, folks, what we have to understand is that it doesn't take much work for darkness to come. All we have to do is forget about the light. It doesn't take much for darkness to overcome our lives. We allow things to come in. We allow frustrations. We allow this. And before long, we don't recognize who Jesus is in our life because all we see is the darkness around us. And we don't really have to work at bringing darkness in. All we have to do is forget the light. When you walk into a room and forget to turn on the light switch, what's the first thing you do? Turn the light on because you know that there's dark. But what we don't do sometimes, church, is realize that there is darkness always around us. And before long, when we aren't focused upon the light, we allow darkness to creep in. It's during those difficult times when the storms come, and if we haven't thought about the light, then we have to scramble around in darkness, hoping that we will find some source of light. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness." There's two reasons that I want to share with you why this statement about Jesus being the light of the world is so significant. In the context of understanding when He said this, and in the area that He said this, in the temple, during the Feast of Tabernacles, remembering all that God had provided for them, remembering the goodness of God and all that He had done. Two things that I want to share with you. One is we need to look at the claim of Jesus. I think it's significant because of what Jesus said. He said, "I am the light of the world." Now, think about this. In the Old Testament, remember, the presence of God was seen in the cloud by day and the fire by night as they were wandering. So when they were remembering all that God had done for the Israelites during this time, Jesus stands up and says, "I am the light of the world." Now, I'm sure that not that Jesus tried to stir the pot, but this is one of those things that got the Pharisees really mad because they did not believe that Jesus was the true Messiah. They were committed in following God's commands and doing all that God wanted them to. They were committed in understanding that there would be a Messiah one day. But for Jesus to stand up and to say, "I am the light of the world," in the midst of all this. So what Jesus was saying is, listen, we're remembering what God has done for us, but I'm saying I am the Son of God. And so the amazing thing about it is when Jesus is making this claim, it is the fact that He is the light of the world. Now, another interesting thing about this is Jesus is not saying that He's a reflection of God. In fact, some of us may believe that we are a reflection of who God is. Because now, granted, we cannot be Jesus because He is the Son of God in His holiness, in His divinity. But He was human walking on this earth, and so we can take upon our understanding of His humanness. Now, when He says that I am the light. It's actually, if you do a Greek word study on this and understanding that it's not so much the reflection, but the actual word that John uses to describe is the act of to shine or to manifest. So it's not necessarily a reflection, it's the fact that we are supposed to shine. So when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, it's not that he was a reflection of God. He's saying, I am shining as the source of the light. Now, let me ask you this. When we ask Jesus into our hearts, when we say, Jesus, you are my life, my Savior, my light, what we are saying is not that we are a reflection of Jesus, but we're saying that we are because the Holy Spirit now lives within us. Now, why do I say this? It's because in John chapter 1, verse 4, it says, in him was life, and that life was the light of men. The life that we have through Jesus Christ is the light that is within the very words of what Jesus is speaking when he says, I am. Now, here's another example. The Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6, for God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, get this, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. So what Paul is saying is that, listen, this light that Jesus talks about, he now made able to shine in us. How is that possible in our sinful self? It's when we accept what Jesus did for us, his death, burial, and resurrection, then we take upon the identity of who Jesus is. And if he says, I am light, then that light now shines in us. And that's the amazing thing about it, folks. But yet sometimes we forget. Oh my gosh, my life is never easy. Oh, all the things that I have to go through. Well, listen, when we do that, we're forgetting about the light which allows the darkness to creep into our life. So let me ask you this. When we begin to make those choices in our life, when we know we're not supposed to make those choices, a lot of times it's because we're just not seeing the light. And if we're not focused and remembering about the light, if we're not remembering Jesus Christ himself, then what we're allowing is that darkness to come into our life where we'll say, uh-oh, I made a wrong decision. And every single one of us in here and listening have made some bad choice in our life. And so that's why it's so important for us to remember what Jesus has done for us. That's why I think it's significant that Jesus says, I am the light of the world. I am the Son of God. I am the light. And that light now lives in you and me. So what light does for us in this claim that Jesus has upon him is that it is a reminder of Jesus now living within us. It's a reminder for the Israelites during their journey of the light that was given to them. It's a reminder of his promise and his salvation that is given to us only through Jesus Christ. And so you see, when Jesus claims the fact that I am the light of the world, what he is doing is allowing us the opportunity to be a light ourselves. And well, Paul, that's almost impossible by the way we live our lives. Exactly. That's why I'm preaching to all of us, me included, is because we have to be reminded that Jesus is the light of the world. In him there is no darkness. And so the amazing thing about it is that when we come to the claim that Jesus has of being the light of the world, we must understand that he is the Son of God, that he is the light. And if we claim to be a follower of Jesus, we have that light within us. Now, let me ask you this. So what are we supposed to do when all the darkness is around us? Well, how do you get rid of darkness? We've talked about this, church. How do we get rid of darkness? We turn on the light. There's no way possible that you and I can get rid of darkness. No way possible. There's nothing we could take, no action, no behavior, no clothing, no reputation, no status, no perfect attendance in church, no tithing to the 20th%, although that would be good. But there's none of that. None of that will get rid of the darkness. Only focusing upon the light. Jesus said, I am the light. So the more we focus upon Jesus, the more we understand his claim to be the light of the world. Remember what Jesus did. Remember that he is the light of the world. Now, second thing that I want to share with you is the fact that he gave us a command. Not only was it a claim of what Jesus did, but he also gave us a command. He says, whoever follows me. whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. This very thing that we've heard and talked about. In him was the life, and the life was the light of men. Jesus, in fact, said to those following him in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. The idea that we are no longer to see our lives as priority, but following Jesus being the priority. This is what it means when we say deny ourselves. Our attitudes, our behavior, our desires, our passions, we all deny so that we may follow Christ. So when Jesus says, whoever follows me will have this light if I am the light of the world, it gives us the understanding that light is also not just a reminder of what Jesus did, but it's also a guide. How many of you, if you have a flashlight, walking in darkness, total darkness? I'm not talking about the moon and the sun and it's a beautiful kind of fall night. I'm talking about total darkness. And if you had a flashlight, but you were shining it behind you and not in front of you, what use is that? It's the idea that we have forgotten what a light's supposed to do. So when Jesus says in his command, whoever follows me, we must see that light is a guide to help us. He says this, John says this in 1 John 1:5. So this is the message we have heard from him and declare to you. God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. If we claim to have fellowship with him, yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not live by the truth. Now let me just stop right there and explain this. If we claim to have fellowship with him, yet walk in darkness, we lie and do not live in the truth. The truth is, when you're walking in darkness, there's no light. When you and I are walking in darkness, there is no light. This is why John says there cannot be any fellowship. That's a lie. To say that, oh, I'm going to have the light but walk in darkness. There's no way that the two could be together. So he goes on and says, but if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, purifies us from all sin. So if we say we're going to have the light and walk in the light, then we understand who the light is and what the light does for us. We remember that the light is something to guide for us. We remember that where we go and what we face, no matter if it's a storm or not, we have been given a guide, a light to be able to shine, to know the path. And where do we find that? We find it in God's Word. We find it in God's presence. We find it in worshiping him. We find it in remembering what God has done for us so that we may know where to go. One of the things, we've had an incredible week here at church. With Fall Fest and all those wonderful things, but the concert was great. Let me just kind of say, I know some of you saw a video of your pastor, and I'm just going to say, as the Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians, I do all things for all people so that some may have a great time at a concert. It's not really what it says. But I was enjoying it with the kids. Owen and I, Owen was dancing, I think the whole concert. Where are you, Brian and Lisa? I saw you somewhere. They're in the back. He was dancing the whole time in the back, and I just happened to be in the back, and I said, well, I can't let him be alone, you know. So I just kind of was dancing like he was dancing. It was fun. But let me tell you this. That's the first time I've ever seen us put away the peppermints. We didn't pass out peppermints. We passed out earplugs. And it was probably a good thing for some of us. I wore them some during that. But the amazing thing is, during the, in fact, Brandon texted me. I think text, or did you come tell me? Text me and said, there is dust falling from the ceiling tiles. And I was thinking to myself, better in sound check than during the concert. So what are we supposed to do about this? Let's shake the dust off and get on. There's a sermon about that somewhere, Brandon. All right? But it was a great time, the concert. But here, in the back, one of the opportunities that we got to do, those of us who are kind of helping and all, is just see what goes on behind the curtains, backstage. And I can't say enough thank yous for all those that helped in Fall Fest and also in the concert, all the things from setting up and unloading trailers and all that kind of stuff. But I noticed something as they were getting ready. There was a guy going through the hallway, and he was putting fluorescent green tape, arrows, on the floor. Some of you may have seen those if you ever went in the back. Because in the back we had their green room and feeding them, and then the dressing rooms and all that kind of stuff. But at every kind of corner there were arrows. And on that they would write stage, dressing room, something like that. So that the performers would be able to know exactly where to go, and they wouldn't have to wonder or think about it, and it gave them just a sense of relief not to have to worry about where to go. They just looked, and that was their guide on the floor. You see, folks, when we remember what Jesus does for us, it's like we've got arrows already put out there for us that we don't have to worry about when the storm comes. We don't have to worry about when the tough time in life comes. We don't have to worry about when everybody seems to turn their back on us. We know when Jesus said, I am the light of the world, whoever follows me. And what does that mean to follow Jesus? It means to deny ourselves. And that is so hard to do. Deny ourselves and follow. Why? Because Jesus is the light. So what's going to help me when those times where I don't know where to turn? I don't know what decision to make. I don't know how to make it in this life. All I have to do is remember that Jesus died on the cross to give me this incredible life. And no matter what happens in my circumstances, I have the light of the world within me. I don't have to worry about trying to reflect. I don't have to try to worry about fixing myself up. I don't have to worry about, what's going to happen. All I have to do is remember that Jesus, the Israelites, when they were wandering, they claimed the promise of God that they would eventually be in the promised land once they learned their lesson. How many times do we have to learn our lesson, church? But all you and I need to do is to focus upon the fact that the light can be a guide to help us no matter what storm we go through. John 16:13 says, but when He, the Spirit of truth, comes, He will guide you in all the truth. Folks, there's times where I have to be reminded. I grew up in church. I was taken to church before I was even born. But there's still days that I have to be reminded. I've read the Bible, and I will continue to read through the Bible in some form or fashion every year, because that's something that I've just committed to doing. But there's days that I'm still going to have to be reminded that if I have Jesus in my life, He is the light of the world. And if I'm walking in that light, there will be no darkness that will confuse me. There will be no darkness that will bring doubt. There will be no darkness unless I don't focus on the light. When Jesus stood up and said, I am the light of the world. When He said, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. What He was doing was proclaiming that He was the true Messiah, the Son of God that was coming to save the world from darkness. And He was promising to each and every one of us that if we walk in the light, we won't have to worry about the darkness. So let me ask you this question. What has God provided for you? When we were singing that song, God is so good, why is God so good? You see, God sent His Son Jesus to die on the cross because the gospel of Jesus Christ is what brings the light into our life that allows us to live in the light. So the question is, are you living in the light? If not, today we need to be reminded of what God has done. Let's pray.